the lawyers in.
So we have the rest of the morning, or as much time as we choose to take of the rest of the morning anyway, to have an initial introduction of H128. Sponsor Representative Sims, who's doing this morning. Welcome. And after we've had that, we'll get Legislative Council to be able to walk through the bill. It's 12 pages, and there's a lot there. Some concepts that we've looked at, but not recently, and maybe some new things that we haven't really at all talked about this year in this committee. There are some pieces of legislation that actually passed out of the House and maybe passed the Senate last year, but never made it through, that showed up again, that are here in this bill. So you're welcome to identify those, or Leg Council can help us with that to the extent that it matters. We're a new group with fresh slate. And recognizing, I'll just put this right up front, that we're nearing the end of the session. We passed crossover. Everybody will remember that. Not likely that we will try and force this bill through our committee and onto the floor and out of the House this session. But at the very least, I thought it would be helpful to have the committee not just look at the bill, but start to think about some of the specific things that are addressed in the bill that we should be thinking about over the summer coming into next year. So with that, Representative Sims, if you'd like to walk us through the bill.
Good morning, committee. Representative Catherine Sims from Craftsbury, representing Orleans 4. Excited to be back with you here again to talk about H128, an act relating to removing regulatory barriers for working lands businesses. And so the purpose of this bill is to modernize Act 250 for our farms and forest-based businesses, to provide clear and consistent regulations that allow operations to grow in place at the appropriate scale for the current and future generations. As you all know in this committee, our working lands entrepreneurs are really the heart of Vermont and Vermont's landscape, like the backbone for our rural economy, creating jobs, producing food and products that we use every day. And, I think a really integral part of what makes Vermont a special place to be. And so just as our farms are key to keeping open land functioning, I believe that the development and support for our forest operations is key to keeping forests intact and functioning to provide the benefits that our forests do for our state and our state's economy. And yet, as you all know, we are losing farm and forest land each year to development. And there are a lot of factors at play here: climate change, shifting markets, supply chain challenges, and changing demographics. And yet, we also often hear from folks that on the ground that Act 250 can add time, costs, and limitations to farms and forest-based businesses. As you all know, Act 250 is Vermont's land use and development law, enacted in 1970, and the law has certainly been instrumental in sustaining, the Vermont landscape that we love, balancing preservation of our unique landscape and economic development needs of our communities. Our farms and forest-based businesses have evolved over time. And this bill seeks to make policy changes around Act 250 in order to adapt to a rapidly evolving industry. And so just want to spend a second kind of talking about Act 250 and how it works in general before sort of diving into what this bill seeks to do specifically. And you all may be familiar with this, but wanted to make sure that we were level setting here. So when businesses make improvements to a site that, which are considered development, they are required to get an Act 250 permit. Right now, logging below the elevation of 2,500 feet is exempt from Act 250. But forest-based businesses, like a sawmill or a mulch producer, are required to go through Act 250 for any development. Similarly, farms are exempt from Act 250, but an accessory on-farm business is not. So any improvement to a forest-based business or an AOFB requires an Act 250 permit. And that might be something really significant, or it might be something, as little as adding a bathroom, a cooler, putting out a farm stand, or adding parking. Would require, going through that process. And so, just to give you a few examples of what that might look like, there's a sawmill like LSF Forest Products, where a former member from Waterville works. They do about 50,000 board feet a year, and they've seen a huge demand for their products, especially over COVID when we're all scrambling to find lumber. And so to respond to that demand for their product, they're looking to expand. That expansion would allow them to double the purchase of logs from their community, supporting more loggers and landowners in our forests. They're only one of two remaining lumber mills in Franklin County. And as a part of that expansion of their mill, they have been required to go through Act 250. When the Rural Caucus went and visited a bunch of forest-based businesses a year and a half ago, we visited Heath Bunnell, a logger who was looking to diversify his business to provide job security for his employees and respond to the ups and downs of our shifting climate and what that means for being able to operate year-round. So he started Kirby Mulch. That business operated out of an old farm site in Kirby, Vermont, and he to set up that business, he had to convert an old farm and buildings to a production and retail location for his mulch business. That meant adding a pad, installing some equipment, and again, he was required to go through Act 250 for that. Last example, so imagine a farm, they maybe have a small farm stand and they're selling corn, going gangbusters, everyone loves buying from their local farm down the road. They have this great location and maybe a number of the other farmers in the area are like, hey, you're selling corn, can I add my tomatoes to that farm stand? And so they want to add maybe additional products like maple syrup and eggs and tomatoes to help support more businesses in the area and maybe also to respond to consumer demand to have one-stop shopping for local food, which is I certainly appreciate. Down the road for me, there's a farm stand I can go to that has a bunch of different local farm products and I only have to make one stop. They would be required to get an Act 250 permit to for that farm stand if they're starting, to sell other local farm products. So even if you already had a farm stand and at first you were just selling your own stuff, you would need to retroactively get an Act 250 permit for that farm stand. So what does that mean for business having to, if you trigger Act 250 for development? So if you're doing something that's considered development, you have to apply for a permit. Those, go to one of the district environmental commissions who are volunteer citizens appointed by the governor. They review the Act 250 permit application, looking at 32 statutory criteria, looking at the impacts that development might have on things like water and air pollution, water supply, traffic, aesthetics, scenic and natural beauty, prime agricultural soils, local and regional plans. The district commission would hold a hearing or hearings. During that hearing, they would gather information and take testimony from anyone who has party status in that matter. Folks that would have party status are the permit applicant, the landowner, municipality, and where the site is located, regional planning commissions, solid waste management districts, state agencies affected by the project, and any person who has a particularized interest that would be affected is entitled to having party status. And so I guess the rule of thumb is if you can see it, hear it, and smell it, you have party status. Is that correct? No. Looking to ledge counsel. Okay, Ellen will correct anything that I didn't frame correctly. But when the hearing concludes, the commission makes a decision and either grants the land use permit and may choose to attach conditions to that. One example of that we've heard around in the context of forest-based businesses is hours of operation. Or sort of numbers of vehicles that can enter a site might be an example of a condition where, the firewood processor is allowed to operate, but they can only have a total of 10 cars come in and out of that site over a certain period of time, or can only operate for a certain number of days over the course of the year, or a certain number of hours. Although we did make some changes around that last session. And important to note that, like any parties, can appeal a decision to the Superior Court and then the Vermont Supreme Court. One other thing that I think is important to mention around Act 250. It doesn't supersede or replace any of the additional requirements that you might have around local or state permits. And so, for development, whether or not you go through Act 250, you might still need A&R wastewater, stormwater, drinking water, wetlands, rivers, streams, permits. Might have to go through fire and safety or other code requirements if it's a public building. Vermont Department of Health could still have licensing requirements if the facility is doing food processing, food sales, or farm stays around lodging. All agriculture folks are still required to adhere to the required agricultural practices. And so, whether you're in or out of Act 250, there are still, a number of other really important permitting processes that make sure that we're being thoughtful about the type of development that happens in our community. And some of the concerns that I've heard from businesses around Act 250 is the cost. There's an application fee, $6.65 per $100,000 of construction costs. Often folks, bring on consultants to help navigate and prepare the application, which may require studies or feasibility studies or, designs. For example, Heath Bono, I think it sounded like, over $60,000 in consultant fees to prepare his Act 250 application to stand up the retail location for Kirby Mulch. Time, some Act 250 permits can move quickly, but depending on the number of hearings and the, potential appeal process, sometimes it can have a significant amount of added time. And, giving party status, sort of opens up your business and what you do on your site for others to kind of weigh in on what you do. And there can be, risk associated with any and all of that. You're taking on upfront time and costs without a guarantee that you'll end up with a permit at the end of the process. So that's sort of hopefully a high level, mostly accurate, I hope, overview of Act 250. Kind of turning to the language in this bill in particular, there are 4 pieces, 2 that are related to forest-based businesses and 2 that are related to farms. And this bill seeks to build on the work of previous sessions and work with stakeholders and the recently completed NRB report on Act 250 jurisdiction over agricultural businesses that grew out of S226 that we passed last year. So for the forestry stuff, Section 2 proposes to reduce the amount of mitigation wood products manufacturers pay for prime ag soils. So right now, NRCS maps soils, and when those soils have lost their agricultural potential due to development, mitigation is either done on site, or if it can't be done on site, folks pay a fee, and that goes to the Housing and Conservation Trust to fund conservation of land. So if you're building a building on prime ag soil and you're not able to mitigate that development, you would pay a set fee to mitigate the development and the impact on that ag land. And there are different ratios. This bill proposes to reduce the fee from 3-to-1 for prime ag soil mitigation to a 1-to-1 ratio for wood products manufacturers. This is the same ratio as we currently use for industrial parks. So I think the baseline for most prime ag soil mitigation fees is that 3-to-1 ratio. We have reduced it in a number of cases, like industrial parks, to a 1-to-1 ratio. This language that's in this bill was in S234 that we passed out of the House and Senate last year, but was vetoed by the governor as a part of a pretty significant Act 250 bill that had a whole bunch of things in it. Section 3 and 4 of this bill proposes to exempt small forest product processors from needing an Act 250 permit. So again, right now, if someone wanted to create a new forest product processing facility, like a firewood processor or a mulch operator or a sawmill, or expand an existing one, they would have to go through Act 250. In statute, we have a threshold that treats small operators as a minor application. So there's already some sort of accommodation to expedite that process. This section removes those small operators from the requirement to go through Act 250 entirely. To give you a sense of what a small operator is, that would be a sawmill that produces 3.5 million board feet or less annually, or a primary processor of forest products that does 3,500 cords or less of firewood, or 10,000 tons or less of wood, whole tree chips, or wood pellets. To give you a sense of sort of who we're talking about here, folks may know Goodridge Lumber in Albany, an incredible cedar law mill in my district. They are doing about 1 million board feet right now. So they would be under that small operator threshold. Allard Lumber, a much larger mill down in the Brattleboro area, does about 10 million board feet a year. So they would not be exempt under the small operator proposal. So those are the two forest products pieces. The bill also has two sections around farms. And so section 6 and 7 advances recommendations from that NRB report on accessory on-farm businesses that we passed last session, which, tried to kind of dig into our current accessory on-farm business regulations and propose a number of different pathways to move forward. And so this would make changes to farming and accessory on-farm business definitions and exempt those businesses from needing an Act 250 permit. Important to note that towns would still be able to do site review and regulate the on-farm accessory businesses. And I imagine Ellen can walk you through in much greater detail about those proposed changes. Again, recognizing that what farming looks like has changed over time, and that much of the future of agriculture is folks not only producing products but adding value to the products or serving as an aggregator of a number of different farm products. So that farm stand down the street from me that sells their own produce but also has eggs and maple syrup, or someone who grows blueberries and then turns it into blueberry jam and blueberry juice or blueberry popsicles or whatever, increasingly folks are diversifying what they're doing to tap into different markets. And, this seeks to update in statute some of those definitions to better support, the sort of future of farming. And Section 8 would require electric generation facilities with a capacity greater than 50 kilowatts to get an Act 250 permit. So right now, large-scale renewable energy projects like wind turbines or large solar fields are subject to 30 VSA 248. Do not go through Act 250. One example of sort of some of the differences in those processes is that when you go through 248, you do not pay prime ag soil mitigation fees. And so when solar fields are put out in prime agricultural soils, they are not paying that prime ag mitigation fee, which, as we discussed earlier, some of our forest-based businesses are going through. So this section would require renewable energy projects greater than 500 kilowatts, so a large kind of commercial scale renewable energy project to get an Act 250 permit. Mm-hmm. I'm finally at the summary stage here. Again, to reiterate, farming and logging are already exempt from Act 250, and I think in part because the legislature has recognized that they are so important to Vermont and Vermont's working landscape. The changes in this bill seek to recognize, how things are evolving and changing, and that farms are selling products directly to customers that are hosting farm-based events that draw visitors to Vermont. Or providing, authentic agro-tourism experiences that can help our farms diversify and prosper into the future. And that all of these things help attract new Vermonters, retain younger Vermonters, entice new farmers, and develop our vibrant rural communities. And similarly, our forest-based businesses, our law mills, our mulch producers, our firewood processors are essential to supporting a healthy forest and all of the benefits that those forests accrue to Vermonters and beyond. And so this bill seeks to modernize Act 250 to provide consistent regulations to help all of these operations thrive into the future. And I hope you'll consider learning more about this session and then maybe advancing something next year. But happy to answer any questions and glad that you have Ledge Council to dig into the weeds.
Yeah, good. Thanks. That was very helpful, understanding what's in the bill and a little bit of background. I'm wondering if we've got, yeah, go ahead, Representative.
So this loosens up some requirements for agriculture and logging while maybe putting on some restrictions on the utility on renewables. So currently, like 250 doesn't cover putting in a solar field or wind turbines at all.
Yeah, so there's a separate process, 30 VSA 248, that is the permitting process for large-scale renewable energy
And that
projects.
would still be in place, but then there would be an additional oversight by 250.
Yes.
Interesting. Why was that added? I'm curious to know.
Is it Shaftesbury? So there's a large solar project in the large field, and proposed, yes. And so that sort of would be one example where, there might be competing interests around land use. And again, I think what this seeks to do is provide, a consistent framework, especially for evaluating the impacts on agricultural soils and the fees associated with that. Again, that our accessory on-farm businesses and forest-based businesses are currently required to go through, and suggesting here maybe that, this might provide a level of consistency across varieties of development that we don't currently have.
Very good.
Representative Rice and then Representative O'Brien.
I was just wondering if those definitions of small forest products companies exist, does that small definition exist elsewhere, or is that?
So my understanding is that they currently go through they're treated as a minor permit application at those levels. And so this is using those current thresholds for what defines a small operator and moves from a minor permit to full exemption.
Representative O'Brien.
So if a farm was going to put in a renewable energy installation on a farm field, does it go through the same 30 VSA 248?
Yeah, so right now, again, I defer all technical questions to Ellen, but my understanding is that any renewable energy project, regardless of who the party is who's seeding with it, goes through 30 VSA 248. But currently, those large-scale renewable energy projects do not go through Act 250. And this would add that Act 250 requirement for large 500 kilowatt and above projects. And I don't think the applicant, what type of business the applicant is, has any impact whether you are required to go through that process or not.
Or mitigation, do you know?
And 30 VSA 248 does not have any soil mitigation requirements.
That's not true.
Okay.
It does. LG actually acts as a legislative council. I can talk about that more, but primary excellence is one of the 248 criteria.
Is mitigation.
But mitigation fees are not.
It's a little more nuanced than that too, and I think possibly the Agency of Agriculture can speak to it more, but solar panels have I believe it's a presumption that they do not in fact destroy soils. So the construction of any roads or their buildings or facilities that are associated with solar panels usually require mitigation. But there's a presumption that the installation of solar panels themselves are not damaging the soil. So other types of electric generation do not have that, and so they would be required to do the primary mitigation.
One more energy one. Do you know if cow power installations, either in the past or going forward, have to get this 30 VSA 248, or do they?
Is that a digester?
Yeah, biodigester.
Yes, I believe so.
cow power.
Yeah. But they were exempt from Act 250 because they're on a farm? Or does it, it's like an energy project on a farm, not considered part of the farm?
It's just, yes, that was, energy generation is regulated by 248.
Representative Graham.
So I see this pretty much exempts Act 250 permits or some of these things. What about municipal zoning bylaws? Is there a reason that wasn't included too?
So the focus of this bill for me was Act 250, did not wade into local or municipal zoning bylaws, but certainly that's something that this committee could choose to may or may not. I mean, there are jurisdictional questions that always come up when we deal with land use as well.
Over the years, we've had testimony where the zoning bylaws has caused more problems.
Certainly something you all could look into.
You mentioned you provided as examples two businesses and how if they wanted to expand, and maybe they do want to expand, they would have to go through the Act 250 permitting process. And then if you don't know the answer to this question, that's fine. But I'm wondering whether, recognizing that Act 250 is 50 years old, been around for a long time, but not forever, and not knowing how old those businesses might be, would they have had to go through the Act 250 process when they originally started their businesses? Or are they small enough that, is there any current exemption for businesses that are below a certain threshold?
So I think my understanding would be whether it falls into the farming bucket or the accessory on-farm business bucket. And anything in the farming bucket is exempt from Act 250, but anything in the accessory on-farm business would not be. And, again, kind of what farms have done or might be doing, has maybe shifted over the last 50 years. And again, there might be a farm that started just farming, but then it starts adding on other things. And that, would shift the kind of jurisdiction. I think there are some questions about if you add something, does that new Act 250 jurisdiction apply only to the accessory on-farm business part, or does it, cover the full business?
I was thinking specifically of the Franklin County sawmill that you mentioned as an example. I don't know how long they've been in business, whether when they started, they would have to go through the Act 250 process. And then the mulch business, when they started, do they currently have an Act 250 permit?
So Heath Bunnell was starting up Kirby Mulch and, was subject to Act 250 from the beginning. I believe there was, and I guess I don't want to speak to the LSF piece. I think there was maybe a little bit of a journey there where they started and did not, and were not under the impression they had to get one, and then they did. And then, so this current expansion would be an additional Act 250 permit for the expansion of the business. I guess I'm realizing in all this conversation, again, maybe to respond a little bit more to Representative Graham's question, part of the intent here is to build on the work that has happened on these particular topics over the previous years. And so there are portions of this bill that have passed in the past. There was a study that we asked for last year, and this seeks to advance those recommendations. And I think I forgot to mention that this committee last session actually did pass Act 250 accessory on-farm business bill, whose number I cannot remember, that ended up going to what was then Natural Resources and sort of stopped there and turned into that study. But, this committee, previous iterations of it did really spend some time on the Act 250 piece around accessory on-farm businesses. And again, this bill seeks to kind of continue those conversations.
Representative Lipsky.
Catherine, thank you for a great presentation. Some context regarding Act 250 and sawmill lumber operations. Logging, timber harvesting has always been exempt from the beginning of Act 250 and still is. It's not exempt from other water quality and other environmental or cultural criteria. But what makes this bill different, and as Representative Sims has said, with ag, it's accessory business uses, on-site uses, which will be very helpful. Those of us who believe in the sustainability of these farm operations. And what we have seen in the moving to the forest products segment, what we've seen is a migration of these kind of businesses out of the state. Some have moved to New Hampshire, some have gone out of business. And that's environmentally, sustainably, economically. It costs Vermont and Vermonters a lot of money because now the forest products have to leave the state, be processed, bigger carbon footprint, shipping them back from other parts of the country or out of the country. So in this way, I feel the initiative is very critical. Sawmills have never been exempt unless they grandfathered 1970 from Act 250. And so this is, in their case, it's a much bigger departure. But you also have to understand that we've gone from over 530 sawmills in my lifetime down to under 20. To be accurate about, you mentioned with LSF, which is a family-run, wonderful operation, you reported their annual production was 50,000 board feet. I'm sure it's closer to 500,000 board feet.
That is what I meant to say.
$500 million. And to put it in context, that's a small sawmill. As we've also discussed, P&R, the last remaining sawmill in Lamoille County, probably is 1.5 million. If Goodrich Lumber is 1.0 million. So these are small operations. They are not, they don't have acres of kilns and other yards. So.
Yeah, thank you for all of that. And again, would want to emphasize that I see our forest-based businesses as having an incredibly positive conservation benefit across the Vermont landscape. That if we want, healthy forests, those forest-based businesses are an important part of allowing all of the, best practice management of our woods. And that, while, maybe development like a Walmart has, a sort of negative impact on our environmental landscape, those forest-based businesses, touch so many acres of woods and the folks who help us maintain those woods, and see this effort as a as a way to recognize that positive impact on our landscape that those businesses have.
Representative Templeman?
This is both to Jed and you, Catherine. So regarding, did you say 20-something mills left in operation? So of those, how many fall underneath that 3.5 million board foot differentiation? I mean, that's a very mathematical.
I'm just going to
guess.
Say
half,
maybe more than.
Oh, okay.
Or half. Big ones, as Representative Sims said, Allard lumber, or Sosmo lumber, which these are huge. Yeah. They're not huge. They are large and successful and multi-generational. Mill River in Clarendon, Lamel, 3 generations in Essex Center. These are real producers. Britain Lumber left the state. They're now in Hampshire, but the rest are smaller mills.
Can I also just ask, of the amount? So I'm assuming that the production that these mills are performing is buildable lumber used in the construction industry primarily, not necessarily
all forest.
All forest.
Hardwood more for
what percentage of the state forest production, or for what we use, how much are we producing of what we use? How about that? Like, are we buying and using more than we are actually producing statewide?
I would highly recommend that if you're interested in
Yeah.
that you invite Paul Frederick from FPR to come talk with you all about the trends around mills and production and what we know about what stays and stayed. And but high level, my understanding is that we are a net importer of.
A net importer. Isn't that ironic? Yeah.
So what other questions that Representative Sims might be able to answer? Representative O'Brien?
So everything in this bill, has it been much discussed with the Forest Research Roadmap? It seems like there would be a lot of overlap there.
So as we, again, like the World Caucus tried to do some real intentional like learning journey a year and a half ago, and we put forward a number of different things in last session's rural omnibus bill. And there was some, Act 250 stuff around accessory on-farm businesses and forest-based businesses that we felt were like immediate short-term actions we could take. And sort of on the other end of the spectrum was this Forest Future Strategic Roadmap that, this committee passed and now incredible work is happening on. And I sort of see them as either maybe ends of the spectrum, sort of what, like trying to having gone on that journey and hear about the challenges and opportunities, say, what can we do right now that we think would have a positive impact? And, these recommendations are some of those. And then at the other end, knowing that we need to make transformational systemic change, and that that probably requires a longer community engagement process with stakeholders to think out of the box about what are the big levers we can pull to ensure that we have a healthy forest and forest economy into the future. And so really looking forward to those recommendations, and hopefully that'll be a lot of stuff that we can dig into and take action on. But in the meantime, there are maybe other more concrete small steps that we can take that I think would complement the work of the roadmap.
Question about the wood, the 10,000 ton number on the wood pellet and wood chips.
Yeah.
I was part of the group that visited the plant in Clarendon, I think it is.
Vermont wood pellets.
Yeah, at the time it was the only wood pellet, and I think maybe we may have heard in the committee that there's a second now operating north of here somewhere.
Richford, maybe in development.
Yeah.
Do you, so,
I think it's in operation, yeah.
yeah. So two questions, I guess. And, if you don't happen to have the answers at your fingertips, that's fine. I'm assuming that the plant in Clarendon is below that 10,000 number, and I'm wondering how much do they produce?
Yeah, I do not know the answer to that. I think, again, the approach here was to take what's already in statute and did not really investigate how those numbers were generated and who they applied to or not. But I think, FDR may be able to help you I did ask former Commissioner Snyder and Paul whether they knew how those numbers were arrived at, and I'm not sure anyone remembered. But again, this is a framework that already exists in statute to sort of define small operators. And so I assume some thought went into that, and those numbers were arrived at for a particular reason.
You did say that, and so I didn't miss it, but
it all takes that.
I can internalize it. So these already exist as definitions for a small operation.
Yeah, these definitions around small operators are already in statute around and would qualify as a minor permit. And Ellen could probably explain the difference between a minor permit and a full Act 250 permit, but those thresholds already exist. I assume that their thresholds were determined for some reason at that level. And my anecdotal understanding is that it covers a number of what we all might think of as small operators and does differentiate from some of the larger forest-based businesses that we have in the state. But I do not specifically know how that applies to the one wood pellet manufacturer that we have.
Yeah.
The future ones that we'd want to encourage.
Just a passing thought, and my understanding in ways that chips are have more moisture content than pellets. They haven't been dried the way the pellets have, so there's presumably less energy in a ton of chips than there is a ton of pellets. So maybe they should have a different standard.
And I think we're definitely reaching the limit of my knowledge, but I think one of those may be like mulch that you're spreading on your garden bed versus pellets that you're burning. I don't know how many people are like producing chips for burning, although Rygate comes to mind. Our resident logger here, but I'm not sure we want to go too far into the weeds on what a poultry chip.
Burning greenwood chips is a giant source of energy in Vermont. Not saying it's not controversial, but Middlebury College, most every high school in the state, hospitals, this building, the electricity is generated from burning greenwood chips. Wood pellets are a more highly processed and basically kiln-dried product that are safe and efficient in homes. But to Representative O'Brien's point, the tonnage and the BTUs that come out of greenwood chips are much reduced, or to your point.
Yeah.
But they are all over the state in institutions.
It's McNeil chips.
So many interesting things for this committee to dig into and learn more about. I encourage you to take up this bill and do that.
As a short comment, nobody is trying to save the world in the long term here, but I really laud the Rural Caucus and your leadership, Catherine, Representative Sims, because this is what I would call triage. You're talking about farms that are really withering. The forest products industry is withering. So it's a temporary effort to try to keep these functions and part of our heritage alive and active while the Forest Future Strategic Roadmap and other long-term, longer collaborative approaches, take shapes.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think I would even add to that, and also recognizing the really incredible innovation that is happening on our farms. And for, I think it's awesome that Heath Bunnell, is logging and adding on value-added, wood products to, ensure employment opportunities for himself and a viable business in the future. And some of the stuff that's happening on our farms around agritourism visits and value-added products and, collaborations across farms, there's some really cool stuff happening. And, the intent here is to sort of modernize our, regulatory structure to reflect the diversity of innovation that is happening on our forests and within our forest-based businesses. So, there are some, really scary declining numbers. And also there's some, I think, real excitement and hope for what the future of our working lands businesses are and the way that they support all of us by producing products that we build our homes with or wipe our noses with or eat, and the benefit that has for our working landscape.
So you probably have other work that you need to be getting back to.
Childcare,
I wanted to ask you, I'm going to go back to Representative Templeman's, I think the first question regarding the last section and the solar or energy. So I'm guessing here, and maybe the way you answered the question informs my guess, that your intent here is to deal with the soil mitigation piece of Act 250, at least that. But I do wonder, and again, I'm sort of restating your question, I think, Representative Templeman, having just outlined the hardship that the Act 250 permitting process currently puts on a couple of different sectors that we all feel are important, to now say, but we're going to put that same hardship on another sector, seems a little not necessarily contradictory, but it might raise questions. And so I want to maybe interpret that as thinking, well, really the intent here is to get at and partly because you answered it this way, the soil piece. But before the committee starts going in, working on this and saying, that's all that they really after here, we'll change that section. I'm going to give you an opportunity to say, no, it's not just that. There's more that we think ought to apply to solar, perhaps developers.
Yeah. I think I would say that, with that section of the bill, hoping to prompt a conversation about the various uses of our land and, the complexities, I think it's so important that we shift towards a non-fossil fuel based way of providing energy and heat and transportation. And there are many competing needs that we seek from our landscape, ecosystem services, working lands, housing, energy production, and how those align or sometimes conflict with each other is complicated. And I think the intent was sort of prompt the conversation. Are these all currently aligned, or are there ways that we can sort of strengthen, supporting the diverse things that we need from our landscape, food production, forests, ecosystems, housing, economic development, renewable energy. And I guess my hope is that there's a level of consistency across all of those different needs, or really intentional incentives or exemptions that reflect a common vision about where we want to go and how all the things align. So.
Representative O'Brien.
So just to be devil's advocate, I think we all agree with helping the farming community and the forest economy. But what would you say to, other entrepreneurs who, say, I want to start building state-of-the-art snowshoes in Glover, or, there's Greenwoods, which was a tractor dealership that's shut down now since Champlain took them away. And East Randolph now has, they're building these amazing prototypes of 3D printers, a bunch of really smart sort of IT people are doing this in the old building. So, why don't they get a pass on Act 250?
Yeah, so I think, again, looking to our current approach towards working lands businesses and saying that logging under 2,500 elevation is exempt, agriculture, farming is exempt. And I think, my understanding is that that's sort of a belief of the positive benefit that those working lands businesses have on our landscape. And I think the conversation, hoping that this bill can help prompt, is like, do we need to modernize those definitions of farming and sort of logging and forest-based business work to reflect the diversity of things that are happening? And I think we can all probably, we may not all agree about where that line is for what is a business that is not farming and that is not, logging or forest-based business. And, we might not all agree. I think, hoping to prompt the conversation, is the definition right now a little narrow, and should we widen it to support these businesses? And maybe the one other thing that I would say is I think their farming and logging and forest-based businesses are really critical for producing things we eat and build with, and protecting our environment and our working landscape. And there are businesses that, as Representative Litsky pointed to before, run on really tight margins right now. And, that may not be true for the snowshoe maker or the, fancy electric airplane or whatever. And, if we want to continue to produce food and, forest products here in Vermont, I hope that we're asking, what are all the things that we can do to reduce the costs and help improve the margins, so that folks who are looking at their future want to choose a career in the forest-based businesses or agriculture, because we depend on them, our planet does.
All right, we'll let you go.
Thank you so much. Always appreciate coming in here with this committee. Thanks for all your good work.
Ellen, you've been patiently waiting, but I'm wondering if you want to allow us to stretch.
Thank you.